Well, it's been quite a while since I've done an ultimate Mordhau combat tutorial, and whilst I did one on general tips and tricks, it was mostly focused on melee infantry. But what about archers? I've been doing research looking at what most people think are the best skills, loadouts and ways to use archery, and talk to some of the archers in my clan as well about what their best methods to go about archery is throughout Mordhau. So in this video I'll be talking about the loadouts and how you can use them, and on the battlefield the best way in order to get the most kills and order really to help your team win the game in the end. It's not a solo game at the end of the day. So welcome, sit back, relax and enjoy today's ultimate tips and trick guide on archery in Mordhau. Before I start this, I'm going to put one quick tip in there. If you put the command in the console r.fog0, this will turn off the fog. I feel like this is a slight exploit, but I thought I'd put it in anyway since it has proved to be very useful when playing as an archer. I don't know if they're going to take this out later on, but when you're on especially mountain peaks, you're often able to get in there and see a lot further, or at least see in a lot more detail what you're shooting at. I don't know how useful it is on many of the other maps, but definitely for Mountain Peak, where fog can be a bit of an issue when it gets further away, doing r.fog0 will turn this off. I mean, you can probably turn the fog up as well, but I don't know why you'd ever do that. First off, let's start with the best build. Of course, finding the best equipment and perks to use as an archer is often really important. At the end of the day, skill becomes before anything. You cannot blame your failure on your tools, but it's often useful to get the tools right first. So what is really the best build? Looking at what most people are saying, the longbow and the huntsman perk are great. Saying this though, talking to an archer main from my clan, Sneaky, he mentions how the longbow is great and reliable in most situations, a sort of all-rounder type thing, whilst the recurve is a really effective bow in close quarters or fast-paced situations, as its faster reload time comes in handy there when you're trying to get multiple shots off at once. It doesn't quite output the damage. I mean, when it comes to longbows or crossbows, this is where they shine in the damage department. But where does the crossbow really come in handy in all of this? Well, as I said, the longbow seems to be the middle ground between the recurve and the crossbow, as the crossbow takes longer to reload, as many people will know, but has a much higher damage output than the longbow and definitely the recurve bow, meaning that for long range and thought out definite firing, it can be the best. But as I said, thought out definite firing is really required for the crossbow, as it's recommended for experienced archers, as missing one shot with the crossbow can be much more detrimental than, let's say, missing a few shots with a recurve bow, because you're able to get another shot off in a couple of seconds with the recurve, and it's going to take you more than 2 seconds to reload that crossbow. An interesting point given to me that I haven't really thought of, and a lot of people said they didn't like this, but I think they're mostly infantry players, so I guess that sort of makes sense. Sneaky told me that the Parish Shield, or the Parish Shield, is a great application in the loadout. I mean, it's only 1 point, which is great, very cheap, and you put it on your back through the battle. If you see an incoming arrow, you're able to whip it out and block that arrow pretty fast. Yes, it's not great when it comes to infantry, almost pretty useless, but being able to place it down in a portable barricade type idea, then able to reload behind it, is very effective. And whilst it's on your back, it also will protect your back for incoming arrows when you're on the move. Now, I know many people don't use it, and if there's any point in this that people will disagree with, it will probably be this one, the use of the Parish Shield. And that makes sense, because for infantry, it's pretty much useless. You can't really block with it like a normal shield, so you can only really put it down on the ground like a barricade, which for infantry that doesn't make sense since you're always trying to push. But for a crossbowman or an archer sitting at the back, this can be very effective as long as it's not taking up much needed space in your loadout. If you have a spare spot, the Parish Shield can often be something that you might want to think about, if that's more your type of thing. But what about armor? Well, honestly, if I'm going to be completely honest, if you're confident enough and you want to play sort of a rush archer with a recurve bow that goes in and just starts spamming archery and goes in, does a bit of melee every now and then, tries to get behind the enemy, get those shots, maybe you could be looking at getting some lighter armor, since you might be able to take 1 or maybe 2 hits if you're very lucky there. If a recurve bow charging is more your thing, then that's probably what you want to be looking at. But talking from experience and talking from other archers, if you want to play as an actual archer that does what archers should be doing, sitting at the back of the battlefield, being very particular about their shots, choosing the right person, the weakest opponents with a crossbow or even a longbow, making sure that you're not getting into the fray, where you're in a good position, you fire a few shots off a weak target and then you can move positions, maybe armor isn't really all that necessary. I mean, it takes up vital points that could be put to something else like weaponry or perks. And as an archer, getting in close quarters is more of a last resort anyway if you're trying to play that point properly. I mean, if you have the spare points, maybe a few bits of light armor, especially something on your head, can be useful. But other than that, I don't really see it being essential to an archer's loadout, especially if it's taken up loadout spots not needed. Also, having no armor makes you a lot faster on the battlefield, so if someone is running at you, as I said, close quarters is a last resort, you're able to get away since you have that light armor. This wasn't very useful before in earlier updates since the chase mechanic made them able to catch up with you nonetheless, but now the chase mechanic has been nerfed, so someone with really light armor or no armor can really get away from an enemy, especially if they've got medium or exceptionally heavy armor. Along with this equipment, the Huntsman perk, as I mentioned before, greatly increases your damage to other archers, which on the whole will be your most prominent aim. The Ranger perk is also great for increasing movement speed whilst aiming with a crossbow or bow. So in total for an archer's loadout we have Huntsman and Ranger perks, paired with a longbow, Parish Shield, and then when it comes to melee, probably the Cleaver is your best bet. It's fast, agile, and does a decent amount of damage up close, and of course can pretty much block any other weapon in the game, and other arrows if you really have to. Okay, so we have the loadout now, but what about actual archery tips and tricks when it comes to fighting on the field? A good way to practice is on the mountain peak. This is because leading shots is your most important skill, as most of the time enemies won't be standing still. This makes mountain peak very useful when you want to come to practicing archer training, since there is a lift on this. If you can get someone standing on the lift and you down below or at different points throughout the map, shooting at that person moving on the lift is very good for leading. But this can also be done if you're on your own, since that lift can move on its own, so while you're sitting on the ground, you can shoot at the lift as it's moving, practicing your leading shots, which as I said is your most important skill here. But when it comes to a battle, find an enclosed position, but also somewhere that maybe has a decent escape route if needed. Saying this though, the towers around the map are often useful, since you have a high position able to see across most of the map, and normally placed at the edges of the map, meaning they're pretty out the way, so you're not the main target. They also have a ladder going up and down, meaning there's only one way that you can be attacked from, unless you're being fired at by other archers. So anyone coming up the ladder behind you can be easily dealt with. Pick weaker armored targets. Unless you're a crossbowman, you're not going to be doing much damage to fully plated enemies. Leave them to your cavalry and infantry. Opponents that are fast skirmish units like rapiers, other archers or engineers are often squishy targets, and yes, especially other archers. They're going to be harassing your troops throughout the game, so put a stop to that. If you're going to aim for someone with heavy armor though, of course the head is a great way to go, as it's one hit kill if you shoot someone in the head and they don't own a helmet or they have a very light hood, and even then with heavy helms often 2 or 3 arrows can take them down depending on your bow and your perks. But what about enemies with shields? Well, often the legs are exposed depending on what shield they have, so this is a great place to hit them. Even if they're running at you, you can hit their legs below the shield, and sometimes they'll panic if they're a less experienced player and let their guard down, making them very vulnerable. But really, I would say try avoid people with shields. As you might expect, shields are for anti-projectiles, so turn your attention to the easy kills, because after all, at the end of the day, you win by killing the enemy, not by getting the most impressive shot on the heaviest armored opponent. A few final things: in a range 1v1, make sure as soon as you shoot and it's a pretty even battle, duck. This means that if they've shot, they're most likely going to be aiming at your head, as I have mentioned, so if you shoot, duck instantly, their arrow will probably go over your head and you can take another shot, but make sure you're always moving on the battlefield. Additionally, do not let your melee combat skill drop. A lot of archers I see spend all their time getting really good at archery, but when it comes to melee cannot defend themselves. And I do realise that, yes, you want to spend your time learning to be a good archer, but often you're not going to have an infantryman protecting you when you're being charged by the enemy. It's often inevitable that you'll have to get down and dirty, and especially since you have next to no armour, anyone can probably kill you with a mace or a sword in one hit, so learn to block. Finally, make sure you're as near an ammo box as possible. Don't shoot into crowds of teammates, please. And if you can learn the drawback times of your chosen weapon, they're all pretty different, so make sure you get used to that weapon and find the sweet spot for you to fire. This can make you the most efficient in reloading and letting loose. But that's pretty much everything I have on this ultimate tips and trick guide for archery. If there's anything else you want to include, make sure you leave a comment and I will try and pin them or boost them up so more people can see them. If you want any more tips and tricks, make sure you look down below. But thanks so much for watching. If there's any other parts of Mordhau you'd like to know more about, make sure you leave a comment and leave a like on this video if you enjoyed it. But subscribe to the channel for more Mordhau and medieval content. But until then, I will see you in the next one.